Robert Gaines was not the kind of man who needed attention to feel important. In fact, the quieter his entrance, the better he liked it. Over the years, he had learned that the most genuine moments came when people didn't know who you were. Today, he wanted exactly that. A genuine, unfiltered look at the company he had built from the ground up. Robert wasn't just any business owner. He was one of the few self-made billionaires in the country, and every inch of his success had come through relentless hard work, smart decisions, and a refusal to give up. His company had grown from a small office in his garage to a massive corporate empire with offices in multiple cities. Yet, despite his incredible wealth and influence, Robert remained humble. He still remembered the days when he couldn't even afford proper office furniture, when he'd work late into the night under a single desk lamp. Chasing a dream that seemed almost impossible, this morning was different. He didn't arrive in his usual chauffeur-driven car, didn't step out wearing a perfectly tailored suit with shiny leather shoes. Instead, Robert dressed as if he were just another person, running errands, a dark blue hoodie, comfortable jeans, and worn sneakers. His luxury watch, worth more than most cars, stayed at home. He carried only a small notebook and his phone. It wasn't that Robert was trying to hide who he was. He simply wanted to see what it was like to walk into his company as a complete stranger. Would the employees greet him warmly? Would they offer help if he seemed lost? Or would they treat him differently because he didn't look like the owner of a billion-dollar corporation? The morning air was cool and crisp. Out of his modest black sedan, a few blocks away from the building, he could have parked in his private reserved spot in the underground garage, but that would have ruined the experiment. He wanted to walk up to the main entrance, just like any visitor would. The streets were busy with people heading to work, sipping coffee, and talking on phones. Robert blended into the crowd easily. From a distance, the headquarters of Gaines Global Industries looked as grand as ever. The glass facade sparkled in the sunlight, and the tall silver letters spelling out the company name were impossible to miss. The building was a symbol of everything Robert had accomplished. For him, it was more than steel and glass. It was the living proof that dreams could become reality. As he approached the large revolving doors, Robert felt a familiar sense of pride. He had been inside those doors thousands of times before, but always as Mr. Gaines, the man everyone stood a little straighter for. The man whose opinion could shape the future of an entire department. Today, however, he was just another face in the crowd. Inside the lobby, the polished marble floor reflected the bright lights overhead. Employees hurried past with folders in their hands, their faces focused, their minds clearly on morning meetings and project deadlines. The front desk sat at the far end of the lobby, staffed by two receptionists typing quickly on their computers. Security guards stood near the entrance, wearing dark suits and earpieces. Scanning the crowd with professional precision, Robert took a slow breath. Looking around as if he were visiting for the first time, he noticed details he hadn't paid attention to in years, the soft instrumental music playing in the background, the faint smell of fresh coffee drifting from the cafe on the corner of the lobby, the smooth hum of the air conditioning. He moved toward the center of the lobby, hands tucked in his hoodie pocket. No one recognized him. He passed an employee who had been with the company for more than 5 years, but she walked by without so much as a nod. Of course, she couldn't be blamed. She was used to seeing Robert in boardrooms and company events. Not dressed casually and strolling through the lobby, Robert had planned this day carefully. He had deliberately chosen a time when he knew many of the executives would be in meetings. That way, there would be less chance of someone spotting him and calling out his name before he could observe anything. As he stood near the elevators, Robert took in the energy of the place. There was a rhythm to it, the quick steps of employees rushing to meetings, the quiet conversations near the coffee counter, the occasional ring of a phone at the reception desk. It was the heartbeat of the company, and he wanted to feel it, without the filter of being the boss. But then something happened that Robert had half expected and half hoped wouldn't occur. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed one of the security guards watching him. The guard's gaze was steady, measuring, almost suspicious. Robert pretended not to notice and turned slightly to look at a display of the company's recent awards on the wall. He read the gold plaques and crystal trophies achievements he had personally made possible, but to the guard, he was just some man in a hoodie staring at things that didn't belong to him. Robert felt a small spark of curiosity. Would the guard approach him? Would he be treated as a valued visitor or as an unwelcome stranger? He decided not to move toward the reception desk just yet. Instead, he lingered in the lobby, flipping open his small notebook and pretending to jot down notes. More employees passed by, some glancing briefly at him before looking away. A few smiled politely, but most didn't seem to notice him at all. The security guard, however, began walking slowly in his direction. Robert kept his expression calm, his pen moving across the page as if he were deeply focused on his writing. In that moment, Robert realized how different this perspective felt. Usually, when he entered this building, people greeted him with warm smiles, offered him coffee, and made sure he was comfortable. Today, there was no special treatment. Only the faint undercurrent of suspicion that he didn't quite belong. Still, Robert wasn't upset. This was exactly why he had decided to do this, to see his company through the eyes of a visitor who had no special status. He wanted the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. As the security guard came closer, Robert closed his notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. The experiment was about to take its first real turn. The security guard finally reached Robert, his steps slow and deliberate. He was tall, with a clean-pressed uniform and a badge that shone under the lobby lights. His eyes were sharp, scanning Robert from head to toe as if trying to place him somewhere in his memory. "Good morning, sir," the guard said politely, but with a firm tone. "Can I help you with something?" Robert smiled lightly. "I'm here for a meeting," he replied in a calm, friendly voice. The guard's expression didn't change much. "Do you have an appointment?" as Robert said, still speaking. Gently, "But it's an informal visit. I'm just here to check in with a few people." The guard tilted his head slightly, as though this answer didn't quite fit the normal pattern. "All right, could you tell me the name of the person you're meeting?" Robert thought for a moment. He said one of the top executives' names. The guard might immediately call upstairs, and his little experiment would be over. So, he decided to keep it vague. "I'll just head up to the main floor and find them," he said. The guard's eyebrows drew together. "I'm sorry, sir, but visitors aren't allowed past the lobby without proper clearance. Do you have a visitor's badge?" "No, I don't," Robert admitted. "I figured I could get one here." Now, a second guard, who had been standing near the reception desk, walked over. He was shorter, but had the same professional, alert look. "What's going on?" he asked his colleague quietly. But Robert could hear him. "This gentleman says he's here for a meeting." "But he doesn't have a badge," the first guard explained. The second guard turned to Robert. "Sir, do you work here?" Robert hesitated. For just a moment, "I own the place," he said with a faint smile. The guards looked at each other, then back at him. One of them chuckled lightly, as if Robert had just made a friendly joke. "Right," the first guard said, smiling politely, but clearly not believing him. "And I'm the president of the country." Robert didn't react, just kept standing there, hands in his hoodie pocket, observing. The second guard's tone became slightly more formal. "Sir, this is a secure building. If you're not an employee or an authorized visitor, we can't let you walk around freely. We'll need you to sign in and tell us exactly who you're meeting." Robert glanced toward the elevators. "I could just head up and surprise them," he said in a light tone, still calm. The first guard shook his head. "That's not how it works here. We'll need to wait by the front desk while we check." Robert nodded slowly, as if considering their words. "All right then, check my name, Robert Gaines." The first guard blinked. The name sounded familiar, but not enough to connect it immediately. He glanced at the receptionist. "Can you check that name, receptionist?" Young woman with neatly tied hair and a warm but slightly distracted smile typed quickly on her keyboard. "We don't have any visitor appointments under that name today," she said after a moment. Robert smiled again. "I didn't schedule one." The second guard sighed, his patience clearly starting to wear thin. "Sir, without an appointment." We can't let you go upstairs. Robert could feel the stares of a few employees passing by. They were curious, glancing between him and the guards, but none of them spoke up. No one recognized him in his casual clothes. He decided to test things further. What if I told you I could walk into any office here without knocking? The first guard crossed his arms. Then I'd say that's not possible, Robert chuckled. Softly, I see. Just then, an office manager in a crisp gray suit stepped out of the elevator. She carried a folder in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached the reception desk. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking from Robert to the guards. "This gentleman says he's here for a meeting, but he doesn't have clearance," the first guard explained. The manager gave Robert a quick once-over. "Sir, you can't just walk in here without proper authorization. If you need to see someone, you'll have to schedule it." Robert met her eyes calmly. "And what if I told you I built this place?" The manager raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure you did," she said politely, clearly thinking he was joking. "But right now, we have procedures to follow." Robert nodded. "Procedures are good. They keep order. But sometimes they also reveal something about how we treat people." The manager didn't seem to catch his meaning. She gestured toward the doors. "Sir, if you don't have an appointment, I'll have to ask you to leave for now." For a moment, Robert stood completely still. In his years of running the company, he had signed countless paychecks, approved major projects, and been the reason thousands of employees had jobs. Yet here he was, standing in his own lobby, being told he couldn't even enter. But he wasn't angry. This was exactly what he had come to see. "All right," Robert said finally, his voice still even. "I'll wait." The guards relaxed slightly, thinking the matter was settled. The office manager turned to leave, but something about Robert's calm, confident presence made her glance back at him. There was something about his eyes, not arrogant, but deeply sure of himself. Still, she didn't press the matter. She walked away, and Robert stood quietly, watching the flow of the lobby. Employees came and went. Conversations hummed in the background. The guards occasionally looked his way, still keeping an eye on him. Robert knew the real reveal was coming. It was only a matter of time before someone who knew him walked in and recognized exactly who they were talking to. And when that happened, the entire lobby would see the truth. For now, he waited patiently, notebook in hand, ready to see how this moment would unfold. Robert stood quietly in the lobby, his hands resting inside the pockets of his hoodie, his gaze calm but observant. The hum of the building's activity surrounded him, the steady clicking of heels on the marble floor, the soft beeps of the reception computer, the faint murmur of conversations between passing employees. The two guards had stepped back slightly, but they kept him within their line of sight. Every now and then, one of them glanced toward him, as if making sure he hadn't suddenly slipped away into the elevators. Robert, of course, had no intention of sneaking anywhere. This was his company. Every corner, every hallway, every department existed because he had once dreamed it up. But that was the irony of the moment. The person who had the most right to be here was being treated as though he didn't belong at all. The receptionist typed something quickly, then looked up and smiled politely. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I checked again, and there's no appointment for you today. If you'd like, I can schedule something for next week." Robert nodded, pretending to consider the offer. "That's kind of you," he said in a warm tone. "But next week is too far away. I'm already here." One of the guards stepped forward again. "Sir, we understand you say you have business here, but without the right clearance, we really can't let you go past this point." Robert looked toward the tall glass windows that let in the morning sunlight. "Interesting," he said softly. "I built this company so people could feel welcome here. But right now, I'm not feeling very welcome myself." The guard's brows furrowed slightly, but before he could respond, a woman in a smart navy blazer approached the reception desk. She was the assistant to one of the senior vice presidents and often handled visitor arrangements. She glanced at Robert and turned to the receptionist. "Do we have an issue here?" The receptionist explained quickly. "He says he's here for a meeting, but there's no record of it." The assistant looked at Robert again. "Sir, who exactly are you here to see?" Robert's eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. You might say, I'm here to see everyone. I take a special interest in the whole company. The assistant's lips pressed into a thin line. She clearly thought this was a bit unusual. I'm afraid we need something more specific. Policy is very clear. Robert could feel the curiosity in the air. A few employees walking by had slowed their pace, pretending to check their phones while subtly listening in. One or two glanced at him with faint recognition, as though his face seemed familiar, but they couldn't quite place him in this casual outfit. The assistant finally said, "If you can't provide the name of your contact, we'll have to ask you to come back another time." Robert smiled politely but didn't move. "That's all right. I'm patient. I'll wait until someone comes down who knows me." The guards exchanged looks. Waiting in the lobby wasn't against the rules, but his calm confidence was starting to unsettle them. Most people, when told they couldn't enter, either left or argued loudly. This man wasn't doing either. He was simply standing there, as though the whole situation was unfolding exactly as he had planned. Minutes passed. Robert took out his small notebook again and began jotting something down. Wasn't anything in particular, just thoughts about how people behave when they think you have no authority. Eventually, the assistant returned. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we really can't have visitors waiting indefinitely without a confirmed appointment. If you could just step outside for a while, we'd appreciate it." Robert looked up from his notebook. "If I prefer to stay here," her tone grew slightly firmer, "then I'll have to involve higher management to resolve this." "That might be a good idea," Robert replied, still perfectly calm. Assistant walked off toward the elevators. Robert knew it was only a matter of time now. Someone with enough authority would recognize him, and this little experiment would reach its turning point. While he waited, Robert's mind wandered back to the early days of the company. Back then, the office had been a cramped space above, a small store. There had been no security guards, no glass walls, no fancy lobby. If someone had walked in, they'd have been greeted warmly, offered coffee, and invited to talk about what they needed. That openness had been part of the culture Robert wanted to preserve, even as the company grew larger and more sophisticated. Now, watching the polished, modern lobby and feeling the guarded atmosphere, Robert wondered if the heart of the company had shifted without him realizing it. The guards remained polite, but visibly cautious. They didn't know who he was, but they seemed determined to follow the rule book. Finally, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and a man in a dark tailored suit stepped out. He's the head of corporate operations, someone Robert had worked with closely for years. The man walked briskly toward the reception desk, a file in one hand, glancing at his watch as if he were in a hurry. The guard straightened slightly, and the receptionist leaned forward to speak to him. "Sir, we have a visitor who says he's here for a meeting," but the man looked toward Robert and froze. His eyes widened and his steps slowed. The file in his hand lowered slightly. In that brief pause, Robert could almost see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just any visitor. This was the founder, the man whose name was on half the legal documents in the building, the one whose signature had approved every major decision. But Robert didn't speak, not yet. He wanted to see how the man would handle the situation. The man in the dark tailored suit, Thomas Hayes, head of corporate operations, took 2 more steps toward the reception desk, still staring at Robert as if his mind was trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. "Mr. Gaines?" he asked hesitantly, almost like he was afraid to be wrong. Robert gave a small nod, his calm smile never fading. "Good morning, Thomas." The entire lobby seemed to pause. The clicking of heels, the murmur of side conversations, even the low hum of the front desk computers felt quieter. People standing nearby suddenly turned their heads, curious about what was going on. The 2 security guards looked between Robert and Thomas, their brows furrowed in confusion. You know him?" one of them asked. Thomas let out a short breath, as if realizing the gravity of the situation. "Know him?" he said, his voice steady, but carrying a hint of disbelief. "He's the owner of the company, the founder. It's the man whose name is on every major contract in this building." The guards' faces shifted instantly. Confusion, replaced by a wave of surprise. One of them blinked rapidly, as though trying to replay the last 10 minutes in his mind. The other took a small step back, his posture loosening. The receptionist's hands froze above the keyboard. She glanced at Robert, then back at Thomas, and then quickly looked down again, her cheeks turning a little pink. Robert didn't say a word at first. He simply let the silence hang there, his expression calm, watching everyone's reaction. Finally, Thomas stepped closer. "Sir, I didn't realize you were coming today." "That's because I didn't schedule it," Robert replied gently. "I wanted to see the company as it runs on a normal day. No special greetings, no early warnings, just business as usual." Thomas nodded slowly, clearly understanding what Robert was hinting at. The first guard cleared his throat. "Well, I didn't realize who you were. I hope I didn't." Robert raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "You were doing your job," he said kindly. "In fact, you followed the rules exactly as you were trained to do. There's nothing wrong with that." The tension in the guard's shoulders seemed to ease a little, though he still looked slightly embarrassed. Robert turned his gaze to Ward, the office manager who had asked him to leave earlier. She had been standing a few feet away, her folder clutched in her hands. Her eyes widened slightly when their eyes met. "Ma'am," Robert said warmly, "you were also doing your job. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad." The manager nodded, quickly, her voice a little nervous. "Thank you, sir. I just didn't realize." Robert smiled faintly. Most people don't expect the owner of a billion-dollar company to walk in wearing a hoodie and sneakers. That drew a small chuckle from a few employees nearby, breaking the tension in the air. Thomas stepped forward again. "Sir Wood, you'd like me to escort you upstairs?" In a moment, Robert replied. "But first, I'd like to make a point." He looked around the lobby, addressing not just Thomas, but everyone within earshot. This company wasn't built on rules alone, it was built on respect. Respect for every visitor, every client. Every new face who walks through those doors, no matter what they look like or how they're dressed. A quiet hush settled over the room. People were listening now, Robert continued. "I came here today as just another visitor to see if we still hold that value close. And what I found is that our procedures are strong. But maybe our openness has faded a little. We need both." His voice wasn't sharp or accusing. It was warm, almost reflective, as if he were speaking from a place of care rather than criticism. Thomas nodded, clearly absorbing the message. The guard shifted slightly, listening intently. Even the receptionist leaned forward a little, her earlier nervousness replaced by curiosity. Robert finished with a simple sentence. "We greet every guest as if they could be the most important person to walk in today because they just might be." With that, he gave a small nod to Thomas. "All right, let's head upstairs." As they walked toward the elevators, people moved aside, their eyes following him. The guard stood a little straighter. The receptionist gave a respectful nod. The office manager exhaled slowly, as if letting go of a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The elevator doors slid open. Robert stepped inside with Thomas. Just before the doors closed, Robert glanced back at the lobby and smiled. Not the smile of someone who had proven a point in arrogance, but the smile of someone who had reminded his people of the heart behind the business. The doors shut, and the lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the air felt different now, lighter somehow. Word of what had just happened was sure to travel quickly through the building. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the familiar sight of polished wood panels, soft lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows greeted Robert. From up here, the view of the city stretched far into the horizon, a daily reminder of how far the company had come. Thomas walked beside him, still looking slightly uneasy. "Sir, I truly didn't know," he said again. Robert waved off the apology. "Thomas, it's all right. This wasn't about catching anyone doing something wrong. It was about understanding how things feel from the other side. Sometimes the only way to do that is to step into those shoes yourself." They walked into the main conference room, where a few senior managers had already gathered for a routine meeting. When they saw Robert, the room shifted instantly, chairs straightened. Notebooks opened, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Robert raised a hand. Please, no need to change anything. Pretend I'm not even here. The managers chuckled nervously, but quickly settled down. Robert took a seat at the head of the table, but instead of opening a report or reviewing numbers, he leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. I had an interesting morning, he began. I came into the building just like any visitor might. No scheduled appointment, no suit, no introduction, just me. He let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. The result was eye-opening. One of the managers shifted, uncomfortably in her seat. Did something happen, sir? Yes, Robert said with a calm nod. I was stopped in the lobby, questioned, asked to leave. All because I didn't look like someone who belonged. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Robert smiled faintly. Now, let me be clear, the security team followed. The rules exactly. They were polite. They were firm. They were doing their job. But it also made me realize something important. Our company culture is shaped by how we treat people the moment they walk through our doors. He leaned back slightly, his gaze sweeping the table. We've worked hard to build a place that's not just successful, but welcoming. A place where every visitor, whether they're a client, a delivery driver, a new hire, or a stranger, feels respected. The managers nodded slowly, understanding his point. Robert continued. Somewhere along the way, we may have gotten so focused on protecting the building and following procedure that we've forgotten the warmth that used to define us. I don't want that to happen? Thomas spoke up quietly. What do you suggest, sir? Robert thought for a moment. We'll start with training, not just security, but everyone. Receptionists, assistants, managers. We'll refresh our values. Make sure that courtesy is just as important as policy. We'll teach people to see beyond appearances. He paused, then added, and more importantly, we'll remind everyone that any person who walks in could be someone whose life or work might change this company, or someone whose life this company could change. One of the senior managers smiled thoughtfully. That sounds like the heart of why we started, doesn't it? Robert nodded. Exactly. They spent the next half hour discussing ideas, a new welcome protocol, short monthly reminders about company values, small gestures like offering water or a seat while waiting. None of it was complicated, but Robert knew small acts could create a big difference. When the meeting ended, Robert didn't go straight back to his office. Instead, he returned to the lobby with Thomas. The same guards were still on duty. Robert approached them with an easy smile. Gentlemen, thank you for being professional earlier. You've handled the situation the way you were trained to, and I respect that. The guards both looked a little relieved. Thank you, sir, one of them said quietly. Robert added, we'll be doing some company-wide refreshers soon. I'd like you to be part of it. You're the first faces people see here. You set the tone for every visit. They nodded firmly, and Robert could see they took the responsibility seriously. As he left the building later that day, Robert walked down the same sidewalk he had taken that morning. But this time, he felt a quiet satisfaction. This little experiment had worked. By the end of the week, word of what had happened had spread through every floor of the company. Some employees were shocked, others embarrassed, but most were inspired. The story became a gentle but powerful reminder that respect wasn't about titles, clothes, or assumptions. It was about treating every person with dignity. And although Robert hadn't planned for it, the incident reached beyond the walls of the building. A few employees mentioned it to friends, and soon it was being shared online. Articles appeared with headlines like "Billionaire owner mistaken for visitor." In his own company, an unexpected lesson in respect from business leader. But Robert didn't care about the attention. What mattered to him was knowing that the company was becoming better because of it. In the months that followed, visitors often commented on how warm and welcoming the staff were. Lobby felt different, not just polished and professional, but human. And every so often, Robert would walk in unannounced again, just to see for himself. He didn't always dress casually, and he didn't always go unnoticed, but the greetings he received, whether people recognized him or not, told him the change was real. For Robert Gaines, that was worth more than any headline or award.